March 15th, 2019. The auction block was no place for dreams to die. But here stood 23-year-old Marianne Fletcher, her wrists bound, watching wealthy ranch owners examine her like livestock. When the biggest rancher in Montana stepped forward, she whispered the words that would change everything. "Please don't sell me, I'll work forever." But could a desperate plea really transform into an unexpected proposal that would shake the entire valley? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The spring air in Copper Ridge, Montana, carried the scent of pine and desperation. Marianne Fletcher stood among 15 other debt servants on the wooden platform of Hammond's trading post, her father's gambling debts having brought her to this moment. 3 years of her life, signed away to pay $47,000 he'd lost in underground poker games before disappearing into the Nevada desert. She wasn't alone in her predicament. The financial crisis of 2018 had devastated small communities across Montana, leaving families scrambling to survive. Debt servitude, though morally questionable, had become legal again under obscure agricultural labor laws that powerful ranchers had lobbied into existence. The desperate signed contracts, trading years of their lives for a chance to clear impossible debts. Marianne's hands trembled as she glanced at the crowd. Ranchers from 3 counties had gathered, their weathered faces revealing nothing as they assessed each person's worth. Some would end up in mines, others in logging camps. The luckier ones might work in ranch kitchens or tend livestock. But everyone knew the stories of those who'd been worked to exhaustion, their contracts sold and resold until they aged 20 years in 5, Lot 17. Called Marcus Hammond, the auctioneer, a portly man whose grandfather had started this trading post during the Depression. Marianne Fletcher, 23 years old, educated through high school, experience in bookkeeping and ranch work. 3-year contract to satisfy $47,000 in debt. Marianne's stomach twisted. She'd grown up on a small ranch before her father's addiction destroyed everything. She knew horses, could mend fences, understood cattle rotation. But none of that mattered now. She was merchandise. The bidding started at $35,000, the minimum required to cover her father's debt, plus Hammond's commission. A logging company owner from Whitefish raised his paddle, then a mining operation supervisor from Butte. The price climbed slowly, $36,000, $37,500, $39,000. Then everything changed. A figure emerged from the back of the crowd, and the entire assembly fell silent. Even Hammond paused mid-sentence. The man stood 6'5", with shoulders broad enough to block the sun. His face was weathered leather, with eyes the color of a winter storm. Everyone in 3 counties knew Clayton Reeves, owner of the Reeves Range, 22,000 acres of prime Montana grazing land, with cattle herds that stretched to the horizon. At 41, Clayton Reeves was a legend. He'd inherited the ranch at 19 when his parents died in a highway accident, and within 2 decades he'd tripled its size. He employed 63 full-time workers, paid fair wages, and had never once participated in the debt servant auctions that other ranchers frequented. His reputation was steel, fair but unbreakable, generous but shrewd. 50,000. Clayton's voice rumbled across the crowd like distant thunder. Gasps rippled through the assembly. The bid had jumped $11,000 in a single breath. Hammond's eyes widened with greedy delight. 50,000 from Mr. Reeves. Do I hear 55? The logging company owner shook his head and lowered his paddle. The mining supervisor stared at Clayton, then turned away. Nobody challenged Clayton Reeves. Not over money, not over land, and apparently not over a debt servant contract. 50,000 going once, twice. Hammond's gavel hung in the air. Marianne's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd heard stories about the Reeves Range. Good stories. Mostly employees who stayed for decades, families who lived in comfortable housing on the property, children who attended the private school Clayton had funded in Copper Ridge. But she'd also heard Clayton Reeves didn't tolerate laziness, incompetence, or dishonesty. Cross him once, and you were finished. Not just fired, blacklisted across the entire region, the gavel cracked down. Sold to Clayton Reeves for $50,000. Marianne's legs nearly buckled. Hammond gestured for her to step down from the platform. Two of his assistants began preparing the paperwork while Clayton approached, his boots thudding against the wooden planks. Up close, he was even more imposing. His hands were scarred from decades of ranch work, his face carved with lines that spoke of long days under the Montana sun. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, held something she hadn't expected. Not cruelty, not hunger. Something almost like weariness. Mr. Reeves, Hammond oozed with false friendliness, an excellent acquisition. She's got ranch experience, you know. Her father used to run the old Fletcher place before. I know who she is. Clayton cut him off, his voice quiet but absolute. He turned to Marianne. Get your things. We leave in 10 minutes. Marianne had nothing to gather except the small canvas bag that held her only possessions. 2 changes of clothes, a photograph of her mother who died when she was 12, and a battered copy of The Grapes of Wrath that had belonged to her grandmother. She clutched the bag to her chest as Clayton completed the paperwork with Hammond, signing documents that made her his legal responsibility for the next 3 years. The crowd had begun to disperse, moving on to the next lot. Marianne noticed several ranch hands from smaller operations watching Clayton with a mixture of respect and envy. One woman, perhaps in her 50s, caught Marianne's eye and offered a small, encouraging nod. It was a gesture that said, "You're lucky. He's a good man." But Marianne had learned not to trust luck. Clayton finished signing and turned to leave without a word. Marianne hurried to follow, her worn boots kicking up dust as she trailed behind his long strides. His truck was parked at the edge of the trading post, a massive black Silverado that looked like it could pull a house off its foundation. He opened the passenger door without looking at her. "Get in." She climbed into the cab, which smelled of leather and coffee. Clayton walked around to the driver's side and settled into his seat, the entire truck dipping slightly under his weight. He started the engine, but didn't immediately pull away. Instead, he sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at the mountains in the distance. The silence stretched between them like barbed wire. Finally, Marianne found her voice. "Mr. Reeves, I want you to know, I'm a hard worker. I won't disappoint you. I can handle horses, mend fences, help with bookkeeping if you need. You afraid of me?" He didn't look at her when he asked. The question caught her off guard. I don't know you well enough to be afraid." Smart answer. He put the truck in gear and pulled onto the highway. Most people who end up in those auctions are broken before they're ever bought, beaten down by life until they'll say anything, promise anything, just to survive another day. Marianne said nothing, unsure where this was leading. "I don't buy people," Clayton continued, his eyes fixed on the road. "Never have, never planned to. But I made an exception today. Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. For the first time he glanced at her. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Because I knew your grandfather, Marianne Fletcher. Thomas Fletcher was the best horseman in 3 states. He helped my father build the Reeves Range when I was just a kid. And when my parents died, he showed up at the funeral and told me something I've never forgotten." Clayton's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He said, "Clayton, when a man has power, he's got 2 choices. He can use it to build walls around himself, or he can use it to build bridges to people who need help. Your grandfather built a lot of bridges. So when I saw Thomas Fletcher's granddaughter standing on that auction block," he shook his head, "I couldn't let you end up in some mining camp or getting worked to death by a logging operation." Tears burned behind Marianne's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I didn't know you knew my grandfather. He died when you were young, good man. Deserved better than watching his son destroy everything he'd built." They drove in silence for another 20 minutes. the landscape transforming from the dusty trading post area to rolling hills covered in spring grass. Eventually, they turned onto a private road marked by a massive wooden arch that read, Reeves Range, EST 1967. The ranch stretched before them like a kingdom. Pastures dotted with cattle, barns that looked sturdy enough to survive an apocalypse, and in the distance, a main house that could only be described as a lodge. Massive timber construction with a wraparound porch and smoke curling from a stone chimney. But Clayton didn't drive toward the main house. Instead, he took a fork in the road that led to a cluster of smaller buildings. Employee housing, Marianne realized. A dozen well-maintained cabins arranged in a semicircle around a communal area with picnic tables and a fire pit. He parked in front of the smallest cabin and killed the engine. "This is yours," he said simply. "It's not much, but it's clean, warm, and private. You'll find linens in the closet, kitchens stocked with basics. Tomorrow morning, 5 a.m., meet me at the main barn. We'll figure out where you fit best on the ranch." Marianne stared at the cabin, then at Clayton. Thank you." He climbed out of the truck without responding. But before he closed the door, he paused and looked back at her. "One more thing, Marianne. On my ranch, people aren't property. I don't care what the papers say. You work hard, you'll be treated with respect. You'll eat the same food as everyone else, earn the same breaks, and when your 3 years are up, you'll leave here with skills and a clean slate." "Understood." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Clayton Reeves walked back to his truck and drove away, leaving Marianne standing in front of her new home, wondering if maybe, just maybe, her luck had finally changed. The cabin was better than anywhere Marianne had lived in the past 2 years. A single room with a kitchenette, a bed with an actual mattress, a small bathroom with running water, and a window that overlooked the eastern pastures where horses grazed in the fading light. She dropped her canvas bag on the bed and simply stood there, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 3 hours. She'd expected cruelty. She'd braced herself for back-breaking labor, poor conditions, and the kind of treatment that turned human beings into work animals. Instead, she had privacy, a home, and an employer who'd known her grandfather. Marianne unpacked her meager belongings, placing the photograph of her mother on the small nightstand beside the bed. Her mother's smile looked frozen in time, young, hopeful, unaware that cancer would take her before her daughter turned 13. After that, everything had slowly unraveled. Her father had tried to hold the ranch together, but grief had driven him to the poker tables. And the poker tables had driven him to ruin. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find a woman in her mid-30s holding a covered dish. The woman had auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid, freckles across her nose, and eyes that crinkled with warmth. "You must be Marianne," the woman said with a smile that reached her eyes. "I'm Rebecca Torres. I run the kitchen operations here, and I live 3 cabins down. Thought you might be hungry after the day you've had." The smell of home-cooked food hit Marianne like a wave. Her stomach growled audibly. Rebecca laughed. "I'll take that as a yes. Mind if I come in for a minute?" Marianne stepped aside and Rebecca entered, setting the dish on the small kitchen counter. "Beef stew and cornbread. Nothing fancy, but it'll stick to your ribs. There's enough for tomorrow, too, if you want to save some." "Thank you," Marianne said quietly. "You didn't have to do this. Maybe not, but that's how things work here. We look out for each other." Rebecca leaned against the counter, studying Marianne with kind but assessing eyes. "I heard Clayton bought your contract today. That surprised me. He's never done that before. But then, he's full of surprises. You've worked here for long. 12 years. Came here after my divorce with 2 kids and nothing but debt. Clayton hired me when nobody else would, gave me this cabin, made sure my boys could go to school. They're 19 and 21 now, both working their way through college." Rebecca's voice carried genuine affection. "This place saved my life." Marianne absorbed this information. "What's he like, really?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "Fair, demanding. He expects excellence, but he gives you everything you need to achieve it. He doesn't tolerate laziness or dishonesty, but he'll move mountains for people who prove themselves. He's also, she paused, searching for words, lonely, I think. He works harder than anyone on this ranch, up before dawn, last one to bed. He's built something incredible here, but he's built it alone. No family. His parents died when he was 19, car accident on Highway 93. He's been running this place solo ever since. Never married, though Lord knows half the single women in 3 counties have tried. Rebecca smiled. He's married to the ranch. That's what people say. They talked for another 20 minutes. Rebecca explained the ranch operations, the cattle herds, the horse breeding program, the sustainable forestry operation on the northern section, even a small organic vegetable farm that supplied local restaurants. The Reeves Range wasn't just a ranch. It was an empire built on hard work and careful planning. After Rebecca left, Marianne ate the stew slowly, savoring every bite. Real food, after months of cheap canned goods and whatever she could afford from gas station convenience stores. When she finished, she washed the dish carefully and set it aside to return tomorrow. She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, the wind rustling through pine trees, an owl calling from somewhere nearby. For the first time in years, she felt something dangerous, hope. 5 a.m. came brutally early. Marianne jerked awake to her phone's alarm, disoriented, until she remembered where she was. She dressed quickly in her work clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, and her worn boots, and hurried through the pre-dawn darkness toward the main barn. The barn was already blazing with light. Inside, she found a hive of activity. Ranch hands moved with practiced efficiency, feeding horses, checking equipment, preparing for the day ahead. And in the center of it all stood Clayton Reeves, speaking with a Hispanic man who looked to be in his 60s. Clayton spotted her and gestured her over. "Marianne, this is Miguel Santos, my ranch foreman. He's been with me since day one. Miguel, this is Marianne Fletcher, Thomas Fletcher's granddaughter." Miguel's weathered face split into a surprised smile. "Thomas Fletcher? That man taught me everything I know about horses." "You have his eyes, Mija." He extended a calloused hand, and Marianne shook it, feeling the strength in his grip. "If you've got half your grandfather's skill, you'll do just fine here." "I'll do my best," Marianne said. Clayton crossed his arms, studying her. "Miguel will evaluate your skills over the next few days. We need to know what you can handle. Don't pretend to know things you don't. That's how people get hurt. If you're not sure about something, ask." "Understood." "Miguel, start her with the horses. See what she knows?" The foreman nodded and motioned for Marianne to follow. They walked through the barn, past stalls housing some of the most beautiful horses Marianne had ever seen. Quarter horses, paints, even a few Arabians. Miguel led her to a corral where a young sorrel mare paced nervously. "This is Copper," Miguel explained. "She's 3 years old, green broke, needs more saddle time. Let's see you work with her." Marianne climbed into the corral, her heart pounding. She hadn't worked with horses in over a year, but her grandfather's lessons were burned into her muscle memory. She approached Copper slowly, talking softly, letting the mare investigate her scent. The horse's ears flicked forward, curious but wary. 20 minutes later, Marianne had halted Copper and was leading her around the corral in smooth circles. The mare responded to gentle pressure, her initial nervousness fading. Miguel watched from the fence rail, nodding occasionally. Clayton appeared beside him, though Marianne hadn't heard him approach. The 2 men watched in silence as Marianne worked. "She's got her grandfather's touch," Miguel said quietly. "Natural feel. You can't teach that." Clayton didn't respond, but Marianne caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not approval, exactly. Something more complex. Over the next week, Marianne threw herself into every task given to her. She worked with the horses, repaired fencing, helped Miguel organize the tack room, and even assisted with the bookkeeping when Clayton discovered she had a head for numbers. She rose before dawn and worked until dusk, driven by a need to prove herself, to Clayton, to the other ranch hands, but mostly to herself. The other employees accepted her gradually. They'd been skeptical at first. Debt servants rarely lasted long, usually overwhelmed by the work or broken by their circumstances. But Marianne was different. She asked questions, learned quickly, and never complained. By the end of the second week, she was eating meals with the others in the communal dining hall, listening to their stories, becoming part of the ranch's fabric. Clayton remained distant but observant. He appeared at unexpected moments, watching her work with the difficult horse, checking her fence repairs, reviewing her bookkeeping entries. He said little, but his presence felt constant like gravity. Then came the incident that changed everything. It was a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after her arrival. Marianne was working in the north pasture with 2 other ranch hands, repairing a section of fence damaged by a fallen tree. The work was hot, sweaty, and satisfying. She was hammering a post into place when she heard shouting from the nearby tree line. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Derek, had been clearing brush when he disturbed a rattlesnake. The snake had struck, catching him on the calf. He'd stumbled backward, tripped over a log, and now lay on the ground, his face pale with shock and pain. Marianne dropped her hammer and ran. She reached Derek in seconds, her mind racing through the first aid training her grandfather had drilled into her years ago. The other ranch hand was already on his radio calling for help, but the main house was 20 minutes away. "Derek, look at me," Marianne commanded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Stay calm. Don't move. The more you move, the faster the venom spreads." She examined the bite, 2 puncture wounds already swelling. Using her knife, she cut away his pant leg to get a better view. She didn't make any incisions or try to suck out the venom. She knew those were myths that caused more harm than good. Instead, she carefully positioned his leg below his heart level and used her bandana to mark the edge of the swelling with a pen from her pocket. "You're going to be okay," she told him, maintaining eye contact. "Help is coming. Just breathe slowly. In through your nose, out through your mouth." Derek's breathing was rapid and shallow, panic threatening to take over. Marianne kept talking, her voice calm and reassuring, explaining what she was doing and why. She'd learned this from her grandfather, that the sound of a confident voice could keep someone from spiraling into shock. Within 10 minutes, Clayton's truck roared up to the fence line. He vaulted over the fence with surprising agility for a man his size and dropped to his knees beside Derek. "Rattlesnake," Marianne reported immediately. "Single strike to the right calf, approximately 12 minutes ago. Moderate swelling, no signs of severe envenomation yet. I've kept him still and marked the swelling progression." Clayton's eyes snapped to hers, surprised by her clinical efficiency. He nodded once and turned to Derek. "You're going to be fine, kid. We're taking you to county medical right now. Miguel's meeting us there with your family." Together, they carefully lifted Derek and got him into the truck. Clayton drove with controlled speed toward town, while Marianne sat in the back with Derek, monitoring his vital signs and keeping him calm. The young man's fear gradually subsided under her steady presence. At the hospital, the ER staff took over immediately. Clayton handled the paperwork while Marianne waited in the lobby, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had sustained her was draining away, leaving her shaky and tired. An hour later, a doctor emerged. "He's going to be fine, thanks to whoever provided first aid." That was textbook perfect. "You probably saved him from serious complications." Clayton looked at Marianne. "That was her," the doctor smiled at Marianne. "Good work. You kept him calm, didn't do any of the harmful folk remedies people try, and got him here fast. He'll be sore for a few days, but he'll make a full recovery." When they finally left the hospital, the sun was setting. Clayton drove back toward the ranch in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Less distant, more contemplative. Finally, he spoke. "Where'd you learn first aid like that?" "My grandfather. He said on a ranch, you might be hours from help. You needed to know how to handle emergencies. He taught you well." They drove another mile before Clayton spoke again. "You could have panicked." "Most people would have. But you took control of the situation, like you'd been doing it your whole life." Marianne didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. When they reached the ranch, Instead of dropping her at her cabin, Clayton drove to the main house. "Come inside. We need to talk." Her stomach knotted with anxiety. Had she done something wrong? But his tone hadn't been angry, just serious. She followed him up the porch steps and into the house. The interior was exactly what she'd expected. Masculine, comfortable, with furniture built for function rather than fashion. But there were unexpected touches. Bookshelves lining one wall, filled with everything from ranch management guides to classic literature. A stone fireplace that dominated the living room. Photographs on the mantel, showing the ranch's evolution over decades. Clayton gestured to a leather couch. "Sit, want coffee?" "Sure." He disappeared into the kitchen and returned with 2 mugs. He handed her one and sat in the chair across from her, his elbows on his knees, studying her with those storm-grey eyes. "I've been watching you these past 3 weeks," he said. "The way you work, the way you handle yourself, the way you treat the horses and the other employees. And today, watching you with Derek," he paused, searching for words. "You're not like the others who come through those auctions. You're not broken. You're not just surviving. You're building something." Marianne wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I'm just trying to do good work." "It's more than that. You've got grit, intelligence, skill. You're the kind of person this ranch needs." He set down his coffee. "Here's what I'm proposing. When your 3-year contract is up, I want to offer you a permanent position. Full employee, competitive salary, benefits, the works. You'd be wasted in just general labor. I'm thinking of becoming a horse training specialist, working directly with Miguel on our breeding program." Marianne's breath caught. "Mr. Reeves, That's 2.5 years away. I know, but I believe in planning ahead. And I believe in investing in people who prove themselves. Consider it something to work toward." She met his eyes, seeing something in them she hadn't noticed before. Respect. Maybe even admiration. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." Clayton stood, signaling the conversation was over. But as she walked to the door, he called after her. "Marianne?" She turned back. "Your grandfather would be proud of you." The words hit her harder than anything else could have. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and stepped out into the Montana night, where stars blazed overhead like promises written in light. Summer arrived in Montana like a warm embrace, transforming the Reeves Range into an endless canvas of green pastures and wildflowers. Marianne had been at the ranch for 2 months now, and the rhythm of the work had become second nature. She rose with the sun, spent her days with the horses, and fell into bed each night with the satisfying exhaustion that came from honest labor. But something was shifting beneath the surface of daily routine. Clayton had become more present in her work life. He'd appear in the training corral while she worked with young horses, leaning against the fence rail and watching without comment. Sometimes he'd offer suggestions, subtle adjustments to her technique that always proved helpful. Other times he'd simply observe, his expression unreadable. Miguel noticed it first. One afternoon, as they were cooling down a pair of geldings after a training session, the old foreman gave Marianne a knowing look. "El Jefe is paying you special attention," Miguel said in his accented English. "In 12 years, I've never seen him spend so much time watching anyone work." Marianne felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He's just making sure I'm doing things right." Miguel chuckled, a sound like gravel in a tin can. "Mija, I've trained 20 people in my time here. Clayton checked on them maybe twice. With you, he finds reasons to be wherever you are." He paused, his weathered face growing serious. "Be careful. Clayton Reeves is a good man, but he's also a complicated one. He carries weight nobody sees." Before Marianne could respond, Clayton himself appeared around the corner of the barn, and Miguel suddenly found urgent business elsewhere, tipping his hat and disappearing with suspicious speed. "Got a minute?" Clayton asked. Of course. He gestured toward his truck. "Come with me. Want to show you something?" They drove north across the ranch, past the main pastures, into territory Marianne hadn't yet explored. The land grew more rugged here, with rocky outcroppings and stands of pine trees. After 20 minutes, Clayton turned onto a barely visible trail that climbed into the foothills. They emerged into a clearing that took Marianne's breath away. A natural meadow stretched before them, carpeted with lupines and Indian paintbrush. A creek ran through the center, its water clear enough to see the stones on the bottom. Beyond the meadow, the Rockies rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks still touched with snow. Clayton parked and got out without explanation. Marianne followed, drawn by the sheer beauty of the place. "This is the original homestead," Clayton said, pointing to a barely visible stone foundation half hidden by grass. "My great-grandfather built a cabin here in 1902. He and my great-grandmother raised 4 kids in a 2-room house on this spot. When my grandfather expanded the ranch, he moved the operation down to where the main house stands now. But this is where it all started." Marianne knelt beside the old foundation, running her fingers over stones placed by hands long turned to dust. "Why did you bring me here?" Clayton stood with his back to her, looking out over the meadow. "Because I don't show this place to many people. It's sacred, I guess. The only place on the ranch where I can think clearly." He turned to face her. "And because I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About this ranch. About the future. About what matters." The intensity in his eyes made Marianne's pulse quicken. "When I bought your contract," he continued, "I told myself it was about honoring your grandfather's memory. And that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth." He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the open space. "I saw you on that auction block and something in me just refused to let you be sold like property. Refused to let someone with your spirit and strength end up broken by the system." "Mr. Reeves." "Clayton," he interrupted. "When we are here, away from the ranch, just call me Clayton." "Clayton," she amended, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand what you're saying." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd never seen from him before. "That makes 2 of us. I've spent 22 years building this ranch. It's been my entire life. I never wanted distractions, never wanted complications. And then you show up and suddenly I'm finding excuses to be near the training corral. I'm lying awake at night, thinking about conversations we've had. I'm bringing you to places I've never shown anyone." The confession hung in the air between them, like morning mist. Marianne's mind raced. She thought about the past 2 months, the way Clayton's gaze lingered a moment too long, the careful distance he maintained, the tension she'd attributed to her imagination. "It hadn't been my imagination at all. You're my employer," she said carefully. "I'm under contract. Whatever you're feeling, I know." Clayton cut her off, his voice rough. "Believe me, I know. I've told myself 1,000 times why this is a terrible idea. The power imbalance, the complications, the fact that you're here because of debt, not choice." He stepped back, creating distance. "That's why I'm telling you this now. So you understand. I won't act on it. I won't put you in a position where you feel pressured or trapped. But I needed you to know the truth because I can't keep pretending it doesn't exist." Marianne stood there, emotions churning inside her like a storm. Fear, confusion, and something else, something she'd been pushing down for weeks. The truth was, she'd noticed the way her heart sped up when Clayton entered a room, the way his rare smiles felt like sunshine, the way she'd started taking extra care with her appearance on mornings when she knew she'd be working near him. But she'd told herself it was nothing. Stockholm Syndrome, maybe, or misplaced gratitude. Not real attraction. Certainly not something he might reciprocate. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed to be honest." Clayton walked back toward the truck, his shoulders tense. "We should head back. Miguel will wonder where we've gone." The drive back to the main ranch was silent, but it was the silence of 2 people afraid to speak, not 2 people with nothing to say. When they reached the barn, Clayton parked but didn't immediately get out. "Marianne," he said, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "Nothing changes. You're still an employee. I'm still your employer. We keep our professional distance. But I wanted you to know, you're not just another worker to me. You never were." He left her sitting in the truck. processing words that had just turned her world upside down. The next 3 weeks were torture. Marianne threw herself into work with desperate intensity, trying to drown out the confusion of her own feelings. She spent longer hours with the horses, volunteered for extra shifts, and avoided situations where she might be alone with Clayton. But the ranch wasn't big enough to hide from him completely. They passed each other in the barn, sat at opposite ends of the table during the weekly staff meetings, exchanged brief, professional conversations about training schedules and equipment maintenance. On the surface, nothing had changed. Beneath the surface, everything was different. The other employees noticed. Rebecca cornered Marianne one evening after dinner, pulling her aside with concern written across her face. "What happened between you and Clayton?" Rebecca asked bluntly. "Nothing happened. Don't lie to me. I've worked here too long. There's tension between you two thick enough to cut with a knife." Rebecca's voice softened. "Honey, if he's done something inappropriate, you can tell me. I'll stand with you no matter what." The fierce protection in Rebecca's voice brought tears to Marianne's eyes. "It's nothing like that. He's been nothing but professional. It's just complicated." "Complicated how?" Marianne struggled to find words. "He told me he has feelings for me, but he also said nothing would happen because of the power dynamic. And now we're both just stuck." Rebecca let out a long breath. "Well, damn. That sounds exactly like Clayton Reeves, falling for someone and then tying himself in knots over doing the right thing." She studied Marianne carefully. "And how do you feel about him?" "I don't know. I can't tell if what I'm feeling is real or if it's just gratitude mixed with proximity. He saved me from a nightmare situation. He's given me a home, a purpose, a future. How am I supposed to separate real feelings from everything else?" "By being honest with yourself," Rebecca said gently. "When you see him, does your heart race? When you're working and he appears, does everything else fade away? When he smiles, on those rare occasions he does, do you feel it down to your toes?" Marianne didn't answer, which was answer enough. Rebecca squeezed her shoulder. "Then you've got some thinking to do. But whatever you decide, remember this: you're not powerless here. You have choices, even if they don't feel like it right now." That night, Marianne lay awake in her cabin, staring at the ceiling and forcing herself to be brutally honest. She thought about Clayton, not as her employer or her savior, but as a man. She thought about the way he commanded respect without demanding it, the gentleness he showed with injured animals, the fairness with which he treated every employee, the loneliness she'd glimpsed beneath his gruff exterior, and she thought about herself. Not as a debt servant or a charity case, but as a woman who'd survived hardship and emerged stronger. A woman who'd proven her worth through skill and determination. A woman capable of making her own choices, regardless of the circumstances that had brought her here. By the time dawn broke over the mountains, Marianne had made a decision. She didn't know if it was the right one, but it was hers, and that meant something. She found Clayton alone in the main barn the next morning, checking on a mare that had foaled during the night. The new colt wobbled on stick-thin legs, while its mother watched with gentle eyes. "Beautiful," Marianne said from the stall door. Clayton looked up, surprise flickering across his face. They'd barely spoken in 3 weeks. "Strong colt, good bloodlines. He'll make a fine addition to the breeding program. Can we talk? Somewhere private." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. They walked in silence to his office in the back of the barn, a small room filled with filing cabinets, a battered desk, and walls covered with charts tracking bloodlines and breeding schedules. Clayton closed the door and waited, his expression guarded. Marianne took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said, about your feelings, about keeping professional distance." She met his eyes directly. "I understand why you told me nothing could happen. The power dynamic, the contract, all of it. But I need you to know something too. Marianne, let me finish." Her voice was steady, surprising herself with its strength. "I'm attracted to you. I don't know when it started or how it happened, but it's real. And I'm telling you this, not because I expect anything to change, but because you were honest with me, and you deserve the same honesty in return." Clayton's expression shifted. Surprise, hope, and conflict warring across his features. You don't have to say this. If you feel pressured, I don't feel pressured. I feel clear, maybe for the first time since I got here. Marianne stepped closer. You're right that the circumstances aren't ideal. You're right that there are complications. But you're wrong about one thing. What's that? You think I'm here only because of debt. That I don't have real choices, but I do. Every day I choose to work hard. I choose to stay when I could run. I choose how I feel and what I do about it. Her voice dropped. And I'm choosing to be honest with you, even though it scares me to death. For a long moment, Clayton simply stared at her. Then he moved, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. You're sure? His voice was rough with emotion. I'm sure. He kissed her then, gentle but intense. And Marianne felt something inside her click into place, like finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clayton rested his forehead against hers. We're going to do this right, he said firmly. No sneaking around, no hiding. I'm going to talk to a lawyer about your contract, see what options we have for ending it early or transferring ownership to you. We're not doing this with any question of coercion or power imbalance hanging over us. Marianne smiled. That's very noble. I'm serious. I won't risk your reputation or your future for this. Then we'll figure it out together, she said simply. And in that moment, standing in a cluttered office that smelled of leather and horse liniment, with the sounds of the ranch waking up outside, Marianne Fletcher finally understood what freedom felt like. True to his word, Clayton contacted his lawyer that afternoon. By the end of the week, they had a plan. Clayton would pay off the remaining balance of Marianne's debt, $39,000 after accounting for her work time, essentially purchasing her contract from himself. The legal paperwork would take 2 weeks to process, after which Marianne would be a free woman with no obligations to anyone. After that, Clayton explained as they sat on the porch of the main house one evening, you decide what you want to do. Stay and work here as a full employee with a proper salary, leave and start fresh somewhere else, or anything in between. Your choice. Marianne watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. You're paying $40,000 to give me choices. I'm paying $40,000 because it's the right thing to do. What happened between us doesn't change that. He looked at her seriously. In fact, it makes it more important. I need you to know that anything that develops between us is completely separate from your employment. No strings attached. You really are the most stubborn man about doing things properly, aren't you? A rare smile tugged at his lips. My mother used to say I'd argue with a fence post about the right way to paint it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade. The ranch spread before them like a living organism. Cattle moving toward their night pastures, horses gathering by the water troughs, lights beginning to glow in the employee cabins. It was a kingdom built on sweat and principle, and Marianne was beginning to understand why Clayton protected it so fiercely. Tell me about your parents, she said softly. Clayton's expression shifted, memories moving behind his eyes like clouds. My father was the hardest working man I've ever known. Up before sunrise every day, never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. My mother balanced him out. She was the heart of this place. Made sure the employees were treated like family, organized community events, ran the books with an iron fist. He paused. They were coming back from a Ranchers Association meeting in Billings when a drunk driver crossed the center line. Dead before the ambulance arrived. I'm so sorry. I was 19. Had 1 semester of college under my belt. Planning to study agricultural business and come back to help run the place. Instead, I came back to run it alone. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The first year was hell. I made every mistake you can imagine. Nearly bankrupted us twice. But Miguel and a few others stuck with me, taught me what I didn't know, covered for me when I screwed up. By the 2nd year, I was treading water. By the 5th, we were thriving. You built something remarkable. We built something remarkable, he corrected. This place is only as good as the people who work it. I learned that lesson fast, he glanced at her. That's why I couldn't stand seeing you on that auction block. People aren't commodities. They're not assets to be bought and sold. They're the whole damn point. Marianne felt something tighten in her chest, a fierce admiration for this man who carried the weight of his principles like armor. What happened to the drunk driver? 5 years in prison. Got out after 3 for good behavior. Clayton's voice was flat. Lives in Great Falls now, works at a hardware store. I see him sometimes when I'm in town getting supplies. That must be difficult. At first, I wanted to kill him. Literally, spent months fantasizing about it. He rubbed his face. But then I realized that anger was eating me alive. It wasn't hurting him, it was destroying me. So I made a choice to let it go. Not for him, but for myself. He looked at Marianne. That's when I really understood what power means. Real power isn't about revenge or control. It's about choosing who you want to be, regardless of what's been done to you. The words settled over Marianne like a blanket. She thought about her own anger, at her father, at the circumstances that had brought her to that auction block, at the unfairness of the world. Maybe it was time to let some of that go too. The 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo. Clayton and Marianne maintained professional boundaries during work hours, but in the evenings they found excuses to be together. They'd take long walks around the ranch, talking about everything and nothing. He showed her the accounts, teaching her the business side of ranching. She shared stories about her grandfather, memories Clayton treasured like gold. The other employees noticed, of course. But instead of judgment, Marianne found acceptance. Rebecca gave her knowing smiles. Miguel would shake his head with amusement whenever he saw them together. Even Derek, fully recovered from his snake bite, commented that he'd never seen the boss man smile so much. On the 14th day, Clayton called Marianne to his office. The lawyer had sent the final documents. With a few signatures, Marianne's debt would be cleared, and she would be free. You should read everything carefully, Clayton said, sliding the papers across the desk. Make sure you understand what you're signing. Marianne read through the documents slowly. They were exactly as promised, a full discharge of debt with no strings attached. At the bottom was a separate document, an employment offer for the position of assistant horse training manager, with a salary that made her eyes widen. That's more than fair market rate, she said. You're worth more than fair market rate. Miguel's getting older. In a few years, I'll need someone to take over the entire horse program. If you want it, the job is yours. Marianne signed the debt discharge papers, her hand steady. When she finished, Clayton took them and placed them in an envelope to send back to the lawyer. Just like that, she was free. Now what? She asked. Clayton stood and walked around the desk. Now I'd like to take you to dinner. A real date. In town, where everyone can see us, no sneaking around or hiding. If you're interested, I'm interested. Saturday night. I'll pick you up at 6. Marianne left the office feeling lighter than she had in years. The weight she'd been carrying, debt, obligation, fear, had lifted. She was her own person again, making her own choices. And she chose to stay. Saturday arrived with perfect Montana weather, clear skies and comfortable warmth. Marianne spent more time than she cared to admit, choosing an outfit from her still limited wardrobe. She finally settled on a simple blue sundress that Rebecca had given her. Claiming it didn't fit anymore, but really just wanting to help, Clayton arrived at exactly 6 o'clock. Driving a truck she'd never seen before, a restored 1970s Ford that gleamed like new money. He'd cleaned up too, wearing dark jeans and a pressed shirt that made him look less like a rancher and more like someone who should be on a magazine cover. You look beautiful, he said. Simply, you don't look so bad yourself. They drove to Copper Ridge, to a steakhouse called the Cattleman that overlooked the valley. The restaurant was busy with Saturday night crowds, and Marianne felt eyes turned toward them as they entered. Clayton Reeves didn't date. Everyone in 3 counties knew that. The appearance of him with a woman was news, but Clayton seemed unbothered by the attention. He held doors, pulled out her chair, and focused entirely on her as if they were the only 2 people in the room. Over dinner, they talked about the future. Clayton shared his plans for expanding the ranch's sustainable practices, maybe adding solar panels, implementing rotational grazing techniques. Marianne described her ideas for the horse training program. techniques she'd learned from her grandfather that could improve their breeding results. "You've really thought about this," Clayton observed. "I love the work. I love the ranch. I can see myself here long-term, building something that matters." She met his eyes. "If that's something you want too, it's exactly what I want." After dinner, they walked through downtown Copper Ridge, past the courthouse and the old movie theater, enjoying the cool evening air. Clayton took her hand, a simple gesture that felt monumental. They were Clayton Reeves and Marianne Fletcher, not employer and employee, just two people exploring whatever was growing between them. They stopped at an ice cream shop, and Clayton ordered 2 cones with the seriousness of a man negotiating a cattle contract. They sat on a bench in the town square, watching families and couples stroll past. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marianne ventured. "Anything. Why didn't you ever marry?" "Rebecca mentioned half the county has tried." Clayton was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "After my parents died, I convinced myself the ranch was enough. That building something lasting mattered more than personal happiness. I watched my employees fall in love, start families, build lives, and I told myself I didn't need that." He turned to look at her. "But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of losing someone the way I lost my parents. Scared of letting someone close enough to hurt me. So I kept everyone at arm's length for 22 years. What changed? You did. Or maybe you didn't change anything. Maybe you just showed me what I'd been missing." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're brave, Marianne. Braver than I ever was. You lost everything and kept going. You were sold like property and refused to be broken. You took every terrible thing life threw at you and came out stronger. Being around you makes me want to be braver too." Marianne felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't feel brave most days. Brave people rarely do. They just keep moving forward anyway." They finished their ice cream in comfortable silence, then walked back to the truck. On the drive home, Marianne leaned against Clayton's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his presence. When they reached her cabin, he walked her to the door like a gentleman from another era. "Thank you for tonight," Marianne said. "It was perfect. First of many, I hope. Definitely first of many." Clayton kissed her goodnight, slow and sweet, a promise of more to come. When he finally pulled away, his eyes held a warmth she'd never seen before. "Get some sleep," he said. "Miguel's starting early rotations tomorrow, and he'll work you to death if you're not sharp. Wouldn't want to disappoint Miguel." She watched Clayton drive away, his taillights disappearing into the Montana night. Then she went inside her cabin and sat on her bed, feeling the full weight of everything that had changed. 3 months ago, she'd been standing on an auction block, her future dark and uncertain. Now she had a home, meaningful work, and the possibility of something she'd never expected to find: love. Life, she decided, had a strange way of taking the worst moments and transforming them into new beginnings. All you had to do was be brave enough to keep going, to keep choosing hope over despair, to keep believing that better days could come. And for Marianne Fletcher, those better days had finally arrived. Fall descended on the Reeves Range with breathtaking beauty. The aspen trees turned gold, the air carried the crisp bite of approaching winter, and the cattle were moved to lower pastures in preparation for the cold months ahead. Marianne had been at the ranch for 6 months now, and she could barely recognize the frightened woman who'd stood on that auction block in March. She'd grown into her role as assistant horse training manager, working alongside Miguel to develop training protocols that were drawing attention from ranchers across the state. 3 buyers had already approached Clayton about purchasing horses trained using their methods. The breeding program was thriving, with 2 colts showing promise for competitive cutting horse events. But more than professional success, Marianne had found something she'd never expected, a place where she belonged. Her relationship with Clayton had deepened naturally, without rush or pressure. They'd established a rhythm, working separately during the day, respecting boundaries and professionalism, then coming together in the evenings. Sometimes they'd cook dinner in the main house, experimenting with recipes and laughing at their failures. Other times, they'd ride out to remote corners of the ranch, watching sunsets from horseback and talking about dreams neither had dared to voice before. The ranch employees had fully embraced their relationship. Rebecca had appointed herself unofficial matchmaker and wedding planner, despite Clayton's protests that nobody had proposed yet. Miguel watched them with grandfatherly approval, occasionally muttering in Spanish about stubborn people who took too long to admit what everyone else could see, but not everyone was happy about the changes. The trouble started on a cold October morning when a black Mercedes pulled up to the main house. Marianne was working in the nearby corral when she saw a woman emerge from the vehicle, tall, impeccably dressed in designer clothes that screamed money, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. Clayton emerged from the barn, and his expression darkened the moment he saw the visitor. "Victoria," he said flatly. "What are you doing here?" The woman, Victoria, smiled with too many teeth. "Is that any way to greet your neighbor, Clay? I was in the area and thought I'd stop by to discuss that water rights situation. We settled the water rights issue 3 years ago. Through lawyers, in court." "You lost." Victoria's smile never wavered. "Details." "I actually wanted to talk about something more personal." Her eyes drifted toward Marianne, who'd stopped working to watch the interaction. "I've been hearing fascinating rumors about you and some girl from those debt auctions. Tell me it's not true." Clayton's jaw tightened. "My personal life is none of your concern, but it is my concern when it affects property values and the reputation of established ranching families in this region." Victoria moved closer, her voice dropping to a more intimate register. "Come on, Clay. We've known each other since we were kids. Our families have been neighbors for generations. You can't seriously be throwing that away for some desperate woman with a criminal father." Marianne felt the words like a physical blow. She'd known people would judge her past, but hearing it spoken so casually, so cruelly, made her stomach turn. Clayton's voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet. "You have 10 seconds to get off my property before I have you removed." Victoria laughed, a brittle sound. "Don't be dramatic. I'm trying to help you. Think about your reputation. Think about the rancher's legacy. You're Clayton Reeves, you could have anyone. Why would you settle for damaged goods?" Clayton moved so fast that Victoria actually stepped back. He didn't touch her, but his presence was overwhelming. "Get off my land now." The smile finally died on Victoria's face. "You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was letting you stay on my property for more than 5 seconds. Leave." Victoria shot one last venomous look at Marianne before retreating to her Mercedes. The car kicked up dust as it roared back down the driveway. Clayton stood rigid, his fists clenched until the vehicle disappeared from sight. Then he turned and walked directly to Marianne. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "Who was that?" "Victoria Ashford. Her family owns the ranch to the east. We grew up together, went to the same schools. She's been trying to convince me to merge our properties through marriage for the last 15 years. His expression was grim. "I've turned her down every single time, but she doesn't take rejection well. She called me damaged goods. She's wrong, and cruel, and jealous." He reached out and took Marianne's hand. "Don't let her poison get into your head," but the damage was done. As Clayton walked back toward the barn, Marianne couldn't shake Victoria's words. Damaged goods, criminal father, desperate woman. The phrases circled in her mind like vultures. That evening, Marianne was quieter than usual. Clayton noticed immediately over dinner. "You're still thinking about what Victoria said." It wasn't a question. Marianne pushed food around her plate. "She wasn't wrong about some of it. My father is a criminal." I was desperate. "And you could have anyone, someone from an established family, someone without baggage, someone who—" "Stop!" Clayton set down his fork. "Victoria Ashford measures people by bloodlines and bank accounts because that's the only way she can feel superior. She's miserable, Marianne. Absolutely miserable. She has money and status and a family name, and she's one of the most unhappy people I've ever known. That doesn't change the facts about my past. You're right. It doesn't. But here are some other facts. You're one of the hardest workers on this ranch. You're brilliant with horses. You're kind to everyone you meet. You saved Derek's life. You've built something here from nothing, and you did it through sheer determination and skill. He moved his chair closer to hers. Your father's mistakes don't define you. Where you came from doesn't define you. The only thing that defines you is who you choose to be right now today. And that person is extraordinary. Marianne felt tears threatening. I don't want to be a liability to you or the ranch. You could never be a liability. You're the best thing that's happened to me in 22 years. She looked up at him, seeing nothing but sincerity in his storm-grey eyes. Really? Really? And if Victoria Ashford or anyone else has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. They finished dinner in silence, but it was the comfortable kind. The understanding between two people who didn't need words to communicate. After they cleaned up, Clayton pulled Marianne into his arms, holding her with a protectiveness that made her feel both safe and valued. Don't let small people make you feel small, he murmured into her hair. You're better than that. 2 weeks later, Marianne was working in the office, updating breeding records, when Miguel knocked on the doorframe. Misha, you have visitors. Marianne looked up to see Miguel's expression, carefully neutral, which meant trouble. She followed him outside to find a sheriff's vehicle parked near the main house. Her heart dropped. Had something happened to Clayton? Had there been an accident? But then she saw the man stepping out of the vehicle and her blood turned to ice. Her father, Daniel Fletcher, looked like he'd aged 20 years in the two since she'd last seen him. His hair had gone completely grey, his face was gaunt, and his clothes hung on a frame that had lost considerable weight. But his eyes, those same blue eyes she'd inherited, held something she'd never seen before. Shame. Marianne, he said, his voice rough. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. The sheriff, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. I'm Sheriff Linda Morrison. Your father recently turned himself in to authorities in Nevada. He's been cooperating fully, providing information about the illegal gambling operation he was involved in. As part of his cooperation agreement, he's being allowed to make restitution visits before sentencing. She glanced at Daniel. He asked to see you? Marianne found her voice. I have nothing to say to him. I understand, Sheriff Morrison said gently, but he's traveled a long way, and he has something he wants to tell you. You don't have to listen, but I'm asking you to consider it. Clayton appeared from the barn, taking in the scene immediately. He positioned himself slightly in front of Marianne, not controlling, but protective. Everything all right here? This is my father, Marianne said quietly. Clayton's expression hardened. The man who sold his daughter to pay his gambling debts. Daniel Fletcher flinched as if struck. I know what I did. I know there's no excuse. But I need to tell her something. Sheriff Morrison looked at Marianne. It's your choice. Marianne wanted to refuse, wanted to send him away without a word. But something in her father's broken expression stopped her. 5 minutes. Say what you came to say. Daniel stepped forward, careful to keep distance between them. I destroyed everything. The ranch, our family, your future. I took your mother's memory and spat on it with every card I played, every bet I made. His voice cracked. When they told me they could settle my debt by putting you up for auction, I should have refused. I should have gone to jail instead. But I was a coward, and I told myself you'd be okay, that someone decent would buy your contract. You sold me like cattle, Marianne said, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion. I know, and I've had to live with that every day since. But I want you to know something. I used my time in Nevada to track what happened to you. I learned that Clayton Reeves bought your contract. I asked around about him, learned his reputation. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. When I found out you ended up here at a place run by a good man, I cried for the first time in years. Not tears of relief. I don't deserve relief, but tears of gratitude that my daughter, despite everything I did, found somewhere she could be safe. Marianne didn't want to be moved by his words, but they cracked something inside her nonetheless. I'm going to prison, Daniel continued, probably for a long time. I'll never be able to make up for what I did to you, but I wanted to tell you face to face. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. And I'm proud of you for surviving what I put you through. Your mother would be proud too. Don't you dare talk about my mother, Marianne said fiercely. You don't get to use her to make yourself feel better. You're right. I'm sorry. Daniel looked at Sheriff Morrison. I'm ready to go. As they started toward the vehicle, Marianne heard herself speak. Dad, he turned back, hope and fear warring on his face. I don't forgive you. Not yet, maybe not ever, but I hope you find a way to forgive yourself. Because carrying that kind of guilt will destroy you, and I don't want that. Despite everything, I don't want that. Daniel nodded, unable to speak. Sheriff Morrison guided him back to the vehicle, and they drove away, leaving Marianne standing in the dust with tears streaming down her face. Clayton pulled her into his arms, and she let herself break, crying for the father she'd lost, for the innocence stolen by addiction, for the years of fear and uncertainty, but also crying for the release, for the unexpected closure, for the ability to finally start letting go of the anger that had been poisoning her from the inside. When the tears finally subsided, Clayton wiped her face gently with his thumb. You okay? I will be, she said. Eventually. That was a kind thing you said to him. About forgiveness. I learned it from someone who told me that real power is choosing who you want to be, regardless of what's been done to you. She managed a watery smile. Someone very wise. Clayton kissed her forehead. Come on, let's go for a ride. I know a place where the world makes sense again. They saddled 2 horses and rode out toward the original homestead, where the aspens blazed gold in the afternoon sun. And there, surrounded by the beauty of Montana wilderness and the steady presence of a man who'd shown her what unconditional support looked like, Marianne Fletcher finally understood that she was no longer defined by her past. She was defined by her choices, and she chose to keep moving forward, one step at a time, toward a future she was building with her own hands. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the Reeves Range in 2 feet of snow by mid-November. The ranch transformed into a monochrome masterpiece. White pastures, dark pines, and skies the color of steel. The work became harder, the hours longer, with livestock needing constant attention and equipment breaking down in the bitter cold. But inside the warmth of the ranch, something else was growing. Marianne had fully stepped into her role, working 12-hour days alongside the crew to ensure the animals stayed healthy through the freeze. She'd earned the respect of even the most skeptical ranch hands, proving herself not just competent but exceptional. When a blizzard trapped part of the herd in a ravine, she'd been the one to devise a rescue plan that saved 30 head of cattle from freezing to death. Clayton watched her with increasing admiration and something deeper, something that kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with a decision that terrified him more than any business risk ever had. On Christmas Eve, the ranch held its annual party in the main barn. Rebecca had organized the event with military precision, tables laden with food, strings of lights transforming the space into something magical, and a sound system playing everything from country classics to modern hits. Employees brought their families, creating a celebration that felt more like a reunion than a work function. Marianne stood near the punch bowl, laughing at a story Derek was telling about his disastrous attempt at ice fishing, when she felt Clayton's presence behind her. She turned to find him holding 2 glasses of something that definitely wasn't punch. Eggnog, he explained. The real kind, with enough bourbon to make questionable decisions seem reasonable. Are you planning on making questionable decisions tonight, Mr. Reeves? Maybe. Depends on how the evening goes. His eyes held a warmth that made her pulse quicken. Dance with me? She took his hand and let him lead her to the makeshift dance floor where several couples swayed to a slow country ballad. Clayton pulled her close, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers against his chest. They moved together easily, finding a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. You've been amazing this winter, Clayton murmured near her ear. The way you handled that blizzard rescue, the training program results, everything. Miguel told me yesterday that you're the best partner he's ever had. High praise from Miguel. He doesn't give compliments lightly. Clayton pulled back slightly to look at her. I've been thinking a lot lately about the future, about what I want the ranch to become, about who I want to build that future with. Marianne's heart hammered. Clayton, let me finish. I know we've only been together for a few months. I know by conventional standards this is too fast. But I've lived enough life to know when something is right. His grey eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. You're right, Marianne. You've been right since the moment I saw you on that auction block, and something in me refused to let you go. The music continued around them, but Marianne felt like they'd stepped into a bubble where only the two of them existed. I'm not good with romantic speeches, Clayton continued. I'm better with actions than words, but I need you to know that you've changed everything for me. You've shown me that building something meaningful isn't just about land and cattle. It's about building a life with someone who makes you want to be better every single day. You do that for me too, Marianne whispered. Good. Then maybe you'll consider what I'm about to ask. Clayton released her hand and reached into his pocket. When his hand emerged, he was holding a small velvet box. The entire barn seemed quiet. Or maybe that was just the sound of Marianne's heart, drowning out everything else. I'm not going down on one knee in front of everyone, Clayton said with a slight smile. That's not my style. But I am going to ask you something I never thought I'd ask anyone. He opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple gold band with a single diamond that caught the light and threw rainbows. Marianne Fletcher, will you marry me? The barn had actually gone quiet. Every person there was watching, waiting. Marianne looked around at the faces she'd come to know and love. Rebecca with tears already streaming down her face. Miguel grinning broadly, Derek giving her an encouraging thumbs up. Dozens of others who'd become her family. She looked back at Clayton, at this man who'd saved her from a nightmare and shown her what real partnership looked like. This man who challenged her to be her best self, who respected her strength, who'd never once treated her as anything less than his equal. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes, I'll marry you. The barn erupted in cheers. Clayton slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with such tenderness and joy that Marianne felt tears spilling down her cheeks. When they finally broke apart, they were immediately swarmed by well-wishers, hugs, and congratulations. Rebecca reached them first, pulling Marianne into a fierce embrace. I knew it. I called this months ago. I'm planning the wedding, no arguments. Miguel shook Clayton's hand with a grip that spoke of deep affection. About time, Jefe. That girl is the best thing that ever happened to this ranch. I know, Clayton said simply. The party transformed into an impromptu engagement celebration. Someone produced champagne that had been just in case, and toasts were made that ranged from heartfelt to hilariously inappropriate. Marianne found herself passed from hug to hug, person to person, each one offering genuine happiness for her future. Later that night, after the party wound down and the guests departed, Clayton and Marianne sat on the porch of the main house, wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching snow fall in the moonlight. I was terrified you'd say no, Clayton admitted. Why would I say no? Because it's fast. Because you're young and could have any life you wanted. Because I'm a workaholic rancher who's probably going to disappoint you at some point. Marianne shifted to look at him directly. Let me tell you what I see when I look at you. I see a man who bought my contract not for cheap labor, but to honor a debt to my grandfather. I see someone who paid $40,000 to give me back my freedom, expecting nothing in return. I see a person who runs this ranch with fairness and integrity, who treats his employees like family, who's built something remarkable through sheer will and principle. She took his hand, and I see the man I love, the man I want to build a life with, not because I'm grateful, not because I'm afraid of being alone, but because being with you makes me happier than I ever thought possible. Clayton's expression softened. When did you know? That you loved me? Honestly, I think I knew that day you took me to the original homestead. The way you shared that sacred space with me, the way you opened up about your parents, that's when I realized you weren't just my employer or even just someone I was attracted to. You were someone I could trust with my whole heart. I knew earlier than that, Clayton confessed. Remember when you saved Derek from that snake bite? Watching you take control of that situation with such confidence and competence, something just clicked. I thought, this is the woman I want by my side when life gets difficult. Because life is difficult, and having someone who can face it with strength and grace makes all the difference. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the snow accumulate on the fence rails and pastures beyond. When do you want to get married? Marianne asked. Tomorrow? Next week? Clayton grinned at her expression. I'm kidding, mostly. Rebecca would murder me if I deprived her of planning a proper wedding. But soon? Spring maybe? When the wildflowers are blooming up at the original homestead. That sounds perfect. We could build a house up there. Not instead of the main house, we'll still need that for ranch operations, but a private place, just for us. Somewhere we can escape when we need to remember what matters most. Marianne leaned against him, imagining it. A house in that beautiful meadow, with views of the mountains and the sound of the creek. A place to raise children, to grow old together, to build memories that would last generations. I never thought I'd have this, she said softly. When I was standing on that auction block, I thought my life was over, that I'd be trapped in servitude until I was too broken to care anymore. I never imagined I'd end up here, with you, planning a future that includes everything I'd given up hoping for. Life has a way of surprising us, usually not in good ways, but sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get exactly what we need at exactly the right time. Do you think my grandfather knew? Marianne asked suddenly. When he helped your father build this ranch, do you think he had any idea that his granddaughter would end up here, would fall in love with the owner's son? I don't know about divine intervention or fate, Clayton said. But I do know that good people leave ripples that spread far beyond what they can see. Your grandfather's kindness to my family created a debt I was honored to repay. And in repaying it, I found something I didn't even know I was missing. He kissed the top of her head. So maybe he knew in some way. Or maybe he just trusted that good deeds eventually circle back around. They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, where Clayton built a fire in the massive stone fireplace, and they curled up together on the couch, making plans and dreaming about their future. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the Reeves Range in crystalline beauty, covering the past and preparing the ground for new growth come spring. And in that warm room, with the man she loved beside her and a ring on her finger that symbolized promises and possibilities, Marianne Fletcher finally understood that she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. She was home. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The auction block that had once represented the lowest point of her life had somehow become the gateway to her greatest blessing. And while she wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, she couldn't regret it either, because it had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life she was building one choice at a time. Some stories, she realized, don't follow the paths we expect. They twist and turn through darkness before emerging into light. They break us down before building us up stronger. And sometimes, when we've lost everything and stand at our most vulnerable, that's precisely when we find what we were searching for all along. Not rescue, not charity, but partnership, equality, love that sees us clearly and chooses us anyway. That's what Clayton had given her. And that's what she would spend the rest of her life giving back to him. A love built not on need or obligation, but on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the unshakable foundation of choosing each other every single day. No matter what challenges came their way, spring came to Montana like a promise kept. The snow melted in rushing streams, revealing earth hungry for new growth. Wildflowers exploded across the meadows, lupines, Indian paintbrush, and countless others painting the landscape in vibrant color. The cattle moved to higher pastures, calves kicking their heels in the warm sunshine. The horses shed their winter coats, gleaming in the morning light, and at the original homestead, in the meadow where Clayton's ancestors had first carved out a life in the wilderness. Preparations were underway for a wedding. It was the first week of May, exactly 14 months since Marianne had stood on that auction block. Rebecca had thrown herself into wedding planning with the enthusiasm of a military general planning a campaign. The ceremony would be simple but beautiful. Chairs arranged in rows, facing the old stone foundation, an arch woven with local wildflowers, and a reception in a large tent where the whole community could celebrate. Marianne stood in her cabin the morning of the wedding, staring at herself in the mirror. The dress was simple but elegant, ivory lace with long sleeves and a flowing skirt that moved like water. Rebecca had helped her with her hair, weaving small flowers into an updo that felt both sophisticated and natural. She wore her mother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry she'd managed to keep through all the years of struggle. "You look absolutely stunning," Rebecca said, tears already threatening her carefully applied makeup. "Clayton's going to lose his mind when he sees you." "I can't believe this is actually happening," Marianne whispered. "Believe it." "You've earned every bit of happiness coming your way." Rebecca squeezed her hand. "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." A knock at the door interrupted them. Miguel stood outside in a suit that looked uncomfortable but dignified. "Mija, there's someone here to see you. Says he has your permission." Marianne's heart skipped. She'd sent the invitation 2 months ago, not knowing if he'd be allowed to come, or if he'd even want to. But there, standing beside a sheriff's vehicle with his hands cuffed in front of him, was her father. Daniel Fletcher looked better than the last time she'd seen him. He'd gained back some weight, and his eyes held a clarity that had been missing before. Sheriff Morrison stood nearby, along with another officer. "Standard protocol for prisoner transport. I'll give you some privacy," Rebecca said. Touching Marianne's arm before leaving, Marianne walked out to meet her father, her wedding dress flowing in the gentle breeze. His eyes widened when he saw her. "You look just like your mother on her wedding day," he said, his voice breaking. "She wore flowers in her hair, too. I didn't think they'd let you come. Sheriff Morrison advocated for me, said you'd invited me and that I'd been a model prisoner. They gave me a 6-hour furlough, supervised." He looked down at his cuffed hands. "I'm sorry to show up like this on your wedding day. If you want me to leave—" "No," Marianne said firmly. "I want you here. I need you here." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve—" "You don't get to decide what you deserve. I do. And I decided that despite everything that happened, despite all the pain and anger, you're still my father. And I want my father at my wedding." She stepped closer. "I'm not saying everything is forgiven or forgotten, but I'm choosing to let you be part of this moment because holding on to that anger was destroying me. I'm letting it go. For me, not for you. Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for being a better person than I ever was." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward. "We'll stay out of the way during the ceremony. He'll be able to watch, but needs to remain with us at all times. I understand. Thank you for making this possible." As Marianne walked back toward her cabin to finish preparing, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Inviting her father had been one of the hardest decisions she'd ever made, but it was the right one. She was building a new life, and that meant making peace with the old one, not forgetting it, but no longer letting it control her. An hour later, Marianne stood at the edge of the meadow, her arm linked through Miguel's. The old foreman had asked for the honor of walking her down the aisle, saying that her grandfather would have wanted someone who loved her to do it. Marianne had accepted through happy tears. "You ready, Mija?" Miguel asked gently, "More ready than I've ever been for anything." Music started, a simple acoustic guitar playing a melody that Rebecca had chosen. Marianne stepped forward, and the assembled guests rose. There were about 60 people present, ranch employees and their families, a few neighboring ranchers who'd become friends, and Sheriff Morrison standing discreetly at the back with her father. But Marianne only had eyes for one person. Clayton stood under the flower arch, wearing a dark suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a classic Western film. His hair was neatly trimmed, his jaw freshly shaved, but his eyes, those storm-grey eyes, held the same intensity they'd had the first day she'd met him. As she walked toward him, she saw those eyes grow bright with emotion. When they reached the arch, Miguel placed Marianne's hand in Clayton's, then stepped back with a satisfied nod. The officiant, a kindly older man who'd known Clayton's parents, smiled at them both. "We are gathered here today in this sacred place, where the Reeves family first put down roots over a century ago, to witness the union of Clayton and Marianne," he began. "Love comes to us in unexpected ways, often when we least expect it and most need it. These two people found each other in circumstances that could have broken them both. Instead, they chose to build something beautiful. The ceremony proceeded with traditional vows, but when it came time for personal words, Clayton cleared his throat and spoke directly to Marianne. "I spent 22 years believing that the ranch was enough, that building something lasting was the only legacy that mattered. And then you appeared in my life, and I realized I'd been building a kingdom but living in it alone." His voice grew rough with emotion. "You've shown me that real strength isn't about standing alone. It's about choosing someone to stand with. You've made me laugh more in 14 months than I did in the previous 20 years. You've challenged me to be better, to think differently, to remember that this ranch is only valuable because of the people who make it work." He squeezed her hands. "I promise to be your partner in every sense of the word. I promise to respect your strength and support you in your struggles. I promise to build a life with you where we face everything together, the good, the bad, and everything in between. I love you, Marianne Fletcher, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." Marianne blinked back tears, determined not to completely ruin her makeup. "Clayton Reeves, when I met you, I was at the lowest point of my life. I'd lost everything, my home, my dignity, my hope. You could have used that vulnerability. You could have treated me as less than equal. Instead, you gave me the most valuable gift anyone has ever given me, the freedom to choose my own path." Her voice steadied as she continued. "You respected me before you loved me, and that made all the difference. You showed me what real partnership looks like, not someone who rescues the damsel in distress, but someone who stands beside her and says, 'We'll face this together.' I promise to be your equal partner in building this life. I promise to challenge you when you need it and support you always. I promise to love not just the strong, capable rancher everyone sees, but the man beneath, the one who's kind and gentle, who carries old wounds but refuses to let them make him bitter. I love you and I choose you today and every day forward." There wasn't a dry eye in the meadow. The officiant smiled. "By the power vested in me by the state of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Clayton, you may kiss your bride." Clayton pulled Marianne into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness and passion that promised a lifetime of moments just like this one. The assembled guests erupted in applause and cheers that echoed off the surrounding mountains. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Marianne caught her father's eye. He was crying openly, making no attempt to hide his tears. She gave him a small smile, and he nodded, mouthing "thank you" once more. The reception was everything Rebecca had promised: delicious food, excellent music, and a celebration that felt more like a family reunion than a formal event. Clayton and Marianne danced their first dance to a classic country ballad, surrounded by people who'd become their extended family. Miguel gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure, talking about how he'd watched Clayton grow from a grieving boy into a remarkable man, and how he'd known, from the first day, that Marianne was special. Rebecca's toast was equally emotional, talking about how she'd come to the ranch broken and how this place had saved her life. And now I get to watch that same miracle happen for someone else. Marianne, you walked into hell and came out the other side stronger. Clayton, you finally let someone pass those walls you built. Together, you're going to do amazing things. Even some of the other ranch hands spoke, sharing stories about working alongside Marianne. about watching her earn her place through skill and determination, about how the ranch had become even better since she'd arrived, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sheriff Morrison approached Marianne. "We need to head back soon. Your father wanted to say goodbye." Marianne found Daniel standing near the sheriff's vehicle, watching the celebration from a distance. She walked over, Clayton beside her. "Thank you for letting me be here," Daniel said. "Seeing you this happy, knowing you've found someone who treats you the way you deserve, it's more than I had any right to hope for." "When do you get out?" Marianne asked. "Another 18 months, if I maintain good behavior. After that, I'll be on parole for 3 years. He looked at Clayton. "I know I have no right to ask this, but take care of her. She's the best thing I ever had a hand in creating, and I nearly destroyed her." "She doesn't need me to take care of her," Clayton said firmly. "She's perfectly capable of taking care of herself. But I'll stand beside her, support her, and love her for as long as she'll have me." "You have my word on that," Daniel nodded, satisfied. He turned back to Marianne. "When I get out, if you're willing, I'd like to try to build some kind of relationship. Not what we had before, that's gone. But maybe something new, honest, real." Marianne considered this. "Send me letters. Tell me about your life, your recovery program, what you're learning. Show me through actions that you've changed. And when you get out, we'll see where we are. That's more than fair. More than I deserve." He hesitated, then said, "I love you, Marianne. I know I didn't show it, and I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that. I love you too, Dad. I hate what you did, and I'm still angry about it. But you're my father, and I can't just turn that off. So we'll figure out what this relationship looks like, one step at a time." Sheriff Morrison gently touched Daniel's arm. "Time to go." Marianne watched the vehicle drive away, carrying her father back to serve the consequences of his actions. It hurt, but it was a clean hurt, like setting a broken bone. Painful, but necessary for proper healing. Clayton wrapped his arm around her. "You okay?" "Yeah, I really am." She leaned into him. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I have closure. Like I can finally close the door on that chapter and fully embrace this new one." They returned to the celebration, which continued well into the night. People danced, shared stories, and toasted the newlyweds until stars filled the sky above the meadow. When the party finally wound down and guests began departing, Rebecca pulled Marianne aside. "There's one more surprise," she said, with a mysterious smile. She led Marianne and Clayton to the edge of the clearing, where a path had been cleared through the trees. Following it, they emerged into a smaller clearing where a beautiful cabin stood, brand new, built from timber and stone, with large windows facing the mountains. "We've been building it for the past 3 months, Rebecca explained. "Everyone on the ranch contributed time and labor. Miguel designed it, the crew built it, and it's yours. Your wedding gift from all of us." Marianne stared in amazement. The cabin was perfect. Not too large, but spacious enough for a real home. A wraparound porch, a stone chimney, and landscaping that made it look like it had always been there. "There's more," Miguel said, appearing behind them. "Clayton, you might want to see this." They followed him inside. The interior was beautifully finished. Exposed beams, a stone fireplace, a kitchen with modern appliances, and furniture that managed to be both rustic and comfortable. But what made Marianne gasp was the wall above the fireplace. Mounted, there were 3 black and white photographs, professionally framed. The first showed Clayton's great-grandparents standing in front of the original cabin on this very spot. The second showed Clayton's parents on their wedding day, standing in the same meadow where Clayton and Marianne had just married. And the third was a photograph of Marianne's grandfather, young, strong, working alongside Clayton's father to build the Reeves Range. Miguel found that photo in the ranch archives. Rebecca explained softly. "We thought you should have it. Your grandfather helped build this place. Now you and Clayton are building its future." Marianne couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She turned to Clayton and buried her face in his chest, overwhelmed by the generosity and thoughtfulness of people who'd become her family. "Thank you," Clayton said to the assembled group, his own voice thick with emotion. "All of you. This There are no words. You've given us all a home and a family, Miguel said simply. We wanted to give you the same thing. Now go on, get out of here. You've got a honeymoon to start. The ranch family departed, leaving Clayton and Marianne alone in their new home. They explored every room, marveling at the details, personal touches that showed how much thought had gone into every decision. A bookshelf already filled with volumes on ranching, horse training, and classic literature. A desk with new accounting ledgers. Even a rocking chair on the porch that looked perfect for watching sunsets. Finally, they stood on the porch, looking out over the meadow where they'd just promised their lives to each other. 1 year ago, Marianne said, I was standing on an auction block, terrified of what would happen to me. And now I'm here, married to a man I love, with a home and a purpose and a future I never dreamed possible. You know what I've realized? Clayton pulled her close. That auction block wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning of ours. Everything that seemed terrible at the time was actually the universe pushing us toward each other. You don't really believe in fate, do you? I believe in choices. You could have broken under the weight of what happened to you. You could have become bitter and hard. Instead, you chose to stay strong, to stay kind, to keep believing in better days. Those choices led you here. He kissed her forehead. And I chose to buy your contract when I'd never done that before. I chose to give you freedom when I could have kept you obligated. I chose to fall in love with you when I'd convinced myself I didn't need anyone. Those choices led me here too. So what you're saying is we chose each other. Exactly. And we'll keep choosing each other every day through whatever comes. They stood there as the moon rose over the mountains, illuminating the meadow in silver light. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The creek bubbled over stones. The wind whispered through the pines. It was the sound of Montana wilderness, wild, beautiful, and eternal. Welcome home, Mrs. Reeves, Clayton said softly. Marianne smiled, testing the sound of her new name. Welcome home to you too. They went inside their cabin, closing the door on the past and opening it on a future they would build together. A future based not on debt or obligation, but on mutual respect, shared dreams, and love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances into something unbreakable. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs. But in that small cabin in the Montana wilderness, two people who'd found each other at their darkest moments were building something bright enough to light up the world. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope for, to find someone who sees us at our worst and chooses to stay, who recognizes our strength even when we feel weak, who stands beside us and says, whatever comes, we'll face it together. Marianne had gone from being property on an auction block to being a partner in building a legacy. She transformed from a woman with no choices into one who defined herself through the choices she made every day. And she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that our circumstances don't define us. Our response to them does. She'd been told to work forever or be sold. Instead, she'd been offered marriage, partnership, and a love that would last a lifetime. Some stories have simple endings. This one had a beginning, the start of a life built on the foundation of respect, watered with dedication, and grown into something that would outlast them both. A ranch would continue to thrive. Horses would be trained by methods they'd developed together. Employees would work in an environment that valued people over profit. And someday, children would run through that meadow, playing where their great-great-great-grandparents had first carved out a home. That was the real legacy. Not land or cattle or money, but the lives touched, the kindness shown, the love shared. And it all started with a desperate woman on an auction block, a rancher who couldn't walk away, and two people brave enough to choose each other when the world told them they shouldn't. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.